I went to a gala celebrating my husband's imminent triumph, only to watch him sabotage his career and our marriage in front of the entire company. What happened next wasn't just shocking. It was my salvation. The champagne tasted like victory, or at least what I imagined victory would taste like. The crystal flute felt delicate in my hand, a perfect counterpoint to the heavy, expensive air of the hotel ballroom. Chandeliers dripped light onto the sea of black ties and sequin dresses. This was the annual Sterling Industries Gala, the biggest night of the corporate year, and for the first time, my husband Mark and I felt like we truly belonged. He was on the short list for the new Vice President of Operations position, and tonight was his night to shine. I'd spent a fortune on my dress, a deep emerald silk that made my eyes pop, and I'd never felt more proud or more hopeful. For the first hour, everything was perfect. Mark was magnetic. He moved through the crowd with an easy confidence, shaking hands, laughing at the right jokes, a glass of bourbon always in his hand. He introduced me to his colleagues with a possessive pride, his arm wrapped securely around my waist. "This is my better half," he'd say, and my heart would do a little flutter. We were a team. We'd worked so hard for this, endured long nights and stressful weekends. The promotion wasn't just his, it was ours. Then he saw her, Chloe, his new executive assistant. I knew her name, of course. It had been cropping up in his stories from work with increasing frequency for the past few months. Chloe organized the whole presentation, or Chloe managed to get us that last-minute meeting. I'd pictured someone competent and professional, probably in her 40s, but the woman Mark was now beelining towards was anything but. She couldn't have been more than 25, poured into a crimson dress so tight it looked like it had been painted on. Her platinum blonde hair was curled into a style that screamed, "Look at me." And she had a laugh that could cut through the dull roar of the party. "Just need to talk strategy for a minute, babe," Mark said, giving my hand a quick squeeze before abandoning me by the seafood tower. I watched him approach her, a predatory glint in his eye I hadn't seen directed at anyone but me in years. At first, their conversation seemed professional enough, if a little close for my liking, but then his hand went to the small of her back. It was a casual gesture, one that could be innocent, but it didn't move. It stayed there, his thumb beginning to draw slow, lazy circles on the fabric of her dress. Chloe didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned into it, tilting her head back and laughing at something he said, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. The celebratory champagne suddenly tasted sour. I tried to catch his eye, to give him a look that said, "What are you doing?" But he was completely captivated. He was in the Chloe zone, and the rest of the world, including his wife of 10 years, had ceased to exist. I saw one of Mark's department rivals, a smarmy guy named David, notice them. David smirked, catching my eye before looking back at the spectacle my husband was making of himself. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crawled up my neck. They moved closer to a shadowed alcove, partially hidden by a large potted palm. They must have thought they were concealed, but from my vantage point, I could see everything. He was whispering in her ear now, his lips practically brushing her skin. Her eyes were closed, a blissful, cat-like smile on her face. He took her drink from her hand, set it on a nearby table, and then his other hand came up to cup her jaw. This was it. This was the point of no return. He was going to kiss her, in front of all his colleagues, his rivals, and his wife. My body went rigid. I was paralyzed, a spectator at my own life's implosion. My mind was screaming at me to do something, to march over there, to throw a drink, to cause a scene. But my feet were glued to the floor. Just as he started to lean in, the low thrum of the jazz band and the cacophony of conversations suddenly dipped. A wave of silence rolled from the grand entrance of the ballroom, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Heads turned. A respectful hush fell over the crowd as a distinguished silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped into the room. It was Mr. Sterling, the owner, the man with the final say on Mark's entire future. He surveyed the room, his sharp eyes taking in everything, a polite, powerful smile on his face. And then his gaze landed with the force of a physical blow directly on the alcove. The polite, practiced smile on Mr. Sterling's face didn't just falter. It vanished, replaced by a look of ice-cold appraisal. It was like a scene from a movie where the record scratches and the music grinds to a halt. Mark and Chloe, lost in their own sordid bubble, were the last to notice. For a split second that stretched into an eternity, they remained in their intimate pose, while the entire senior management of Sterling Industries watched. Then, Mark's eyes followed the collective gaze of the room, and he saw him. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He dropped Chloe's jaw and sprang back as if he'd been electrocuted, his hands flying up in a gesture that was half surrender, half warding off a blow. Chloe, suddenly exposed, looked bewildered for a moment before a mask of cool indifference settled on her features, though a faint blush crept up her neck. My own paralysis finally broke, replaced by a searing, white-hot rage. The humiliation was absolute. It wasn't just that my husband was cheating on me. He was doing it with a breathtaking stupidity that had just torpedoed our entire future. The promotion, the house we were saving for, the life we had meticulously built. I could feel it all turning to dust. I watched Mark, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, desperately trying to formulate an explanation that didn't exist. He looked from Mr. Sterling to Chloe, and then finally, his eyes found mine across the room. The look on his face wasn't one of remorse. It was a flash of pure, unadulterated panic, mixed with something else. Blame, as if this was somehow my fault. Mr. Sterling didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He did something far more terrifying. He started to walk. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, the silence so profound I could hear the tiny clink of ice in someone's glass. Every eye in the room was on him, then on Mark, then back to him. Mark looked like a cornered animal, ready to bolt. I expected Mr. Sterling to march right up to him, to deliver a quiet but career-ending reprimand, to fire him on the spot. I braced myself for the impact, for the final catastrophic explosion that would end our night and, quite possibly, our marriage. But he didn't stop at Mark. He walked right past the alcove, not even giving my husband or his secretary a second glance. It was the ultimate power move, a dismissal so complete it was more insulting than any tirade. Mark looked utterly bewildered. I held my breath, wondering where the great man was going. Was he heading for the bar? For the exit? And then I realized his path was unnervingly direct. He was coming straight towards me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Me? Why was he coming to me? I was just the wife, the collateral damage, the wallpaper in this corporate nightmare. He stopped less than a foot away from me, his presence so commanding it felt like the air had thinned. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were not filled with pity, as I had expected. They were sharp, analytical, and was that a flicker of recognition? He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The entire ballroom was watching us, waiting. "Mrs. Davies," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone that cut through the silence. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He knew exactly who I was. I could only manage a shaky nod in response, my throat too tight to speak. He looked past me for a brief moment, his gaze sweeping over my trembling husband. Before it settled back on me, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice for my ears only, though the intensity of his stare made it feel like he was shouting. "Your husband has just made a grave error in judgment," he said softly. "But I've been looking for someone with a talent for crisis management. I think you and I should have a conversation. My office, Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp." He held my gaze for a moment longer, then gave a curt nod and turned, melting back into the crowd as smoothly as he had appeared. The spell was broken. The party's muted roar returned, but it was different now, charged with gossip and speculation. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, on Mark. He stumbled out of the alcove, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, and beelined for me, grabbing my elbow. "What was that? What did he say to you?" he hissed, his bourbon-laced breath hot on my cheek. I looked at his hand on my arm, then back at his panicked face. The man I thought I knew, the partner I had loved and supported, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a weak and entitled boy who had just gambled away our future for a cheap thrill and was now looking to blame me for it. I pulled my arm away with a force that surprised us both. "We're leaving," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the ice in Mr. Sterling's eyes. The car ride home was a symphony of suffocating silence. He kept opening his mouth to speak, to spin some pathetic excuse, but I would just turn my head and stare out the window at the blurred city lights. The second the front door clicked shut behind us, the dam broke. "This is your fault," he exploded, throwing his keys onto the hall table. "You and the pressure you put on me. It was just a harmless flirtation, a way to blow off steam. You have no idea what it's like." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The fire inside me had burned away all my tears, leaving behind something hard and unyielding. I calmly took off my wrap and draped it over a chair. "Was it harmless when you were about to kiss her, Mark? In front of everyone? Was it harmless when you threw away 10 years of our work for her? Was it harmless when you humiliated me in front of the one man who held our future in his hands?" He deflated, sputtering. He can't have seen. He saw everything. I cut him off. "And what's worse, you didn't care who saw. You didn't even see me." I walked over to him, stopping just a few inches away. He looked smaller, somehow, pitiable. "Get your things. I want you out by morning." On Monday morning, I walked into the Sterling Industries headquarters, not as a supportive wife, but as myself. I wore my sharpest suit, my heels clicking with a purpose I hadn't felt in a decade. Mr. Sterling's office was on the top floor with a panoramic view of the city. He greeted me not with pity, but with a handshake and a cup of coffee. "I looked into your work history, Mrs. Davies," he began, gesturing for me to sit. "Before you married, you were a rising star in PR and project management at Connolly Corp. Your record was impeccable. Then you stopped." I nodded. "I chose to support my husband's career." "A noble choice," he said, "but a waste of talent. What I saw on Friday night, aside from my senior manager's spectacular lack of discretion, was your composure. You didn't cause a scene. You didn't fall apart. You assessed the situation and maintained your dignity under extreme fire. That is a skill I value far more than your husband's sales figures." He leaned forward. "His entire department is now a liability. The morale is shot, and his judgment is clearly compromised. I am terminating his employment this afternoon. The VP position he was vying for now needs a leader who can clean up his mess, restore confidence, and manage a team in crisis. The position is yours, if you want it. 6 months later, I sat in what was supposed to have been Mark's office. It was mine now. The title on the door read, Vice President of Operations, and it suited me. Mark had tried to fight his termination, but a hushed-up sexual harassment complaint from Chloe filed as soon as she realized she was going down with his ship sealed his fate. I heard they tried living together for a month before the reality of unemployment and recrimination tore them apart. He was last seen interviewing for a junior sales position at a rival firm. I rarely thought about him. My days were filled with challenges, with strategy meetings, with the deep satisfaction of solving complex problems. My team respected me, and my work spoke for itself. That evening, as I locked up my office, I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the window, the city lights twinkling behind me like 1,000 tiny celebrations. I remembered the champagne from the gala, how I'd thought it tasted like victory. I had been wrong. This quiet confidence, this hard-won independence, this future that was entirely my own, this is what victory truly tasted like.